Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Reprogram Podcast. This is Mike Darnell. I have a very, very special guest with me today. I want to take just a brief second and introduce Dr. Caroline Leaf. I'm going to do this by reading just a little bit of the bio that I have here because I want you to know what she has accomplished. And this is very summarized, I'm sure, because we could probably be here all day. But Dr. Caroline Leaf is a globally acclaimed communication pathologist and clinical and research neuroscientist, celebrated for her groundbreaking work in harnessing the power of the mind to transform the brain and unlock sustainable happiness and health. And there's a lot more to that. And so we are here today. She is going to be with us at the Reprogram Conference in September. But everybody just turn up your volumes and be ready for this. Dr. Caroline Leaf is in the building. Hello, Dr. Leaf. How are we today?
Very good, Pastor Mike. Nice to connect with you and meet you. And I'm looking forward to the conference.
Yes, ma'am. You know, I want to start, the way I generally do the podcast is I have questions, I have preparations and everything, but I want to just have a dialogue for a little bit here. And so I'm just going to talk through some ideas here. First, how I came across your information and your content. I've been teaching for some years about this idea. I wrote a book some years ago called Reprogramming, and it was more in a biblical sense, changing your mind back to thinking from the kingdom of God, in a sense. And so I had not heard of you before until I was doing some research, and I believe I stumbled across, because I was talking about reprogramming the mind, and I think somehow those keywords or something popped up, and then you started coming up. And so as I started to do some research about it, I said, my goodness, I got to figure out a way to connect with Dr. Leaf, because the fact that you were in all these different settings, you were in, science conferences and brain conferences and then church conferences. And I saw the back and forth of how you were going between these worlds, and that really intrigued me. But also I had a pastor friend who will also be at the conference, Pastor Ron Carpenter, and he is actually the church I was born again at. He was my pastor for all these years, and so I've been in ministry 20 years. Pastor Hope will be here and Pastor Carpenter, and then I just didn't know that you guys knew each other in some kind of way. So I was just with them, and he was on the podcast also recently as well. So anyway, we're glad to have you here. So the first thing that I want to dive into, you talk a lot about, the mind and brain connection, and I don't know if everybody understands how those two things go together. But as I've heard you talk about these things, you talk about them in a distinctive way. They're not actually like the same thing, right? But they're related. How does the mind and the brain work together, and why are they not the same thing?
Such a good question, and thank you, Pastor Mike, for that introduction. And I'm pleased that you found out about this information, because it's so relevant. You'll see now as we go through these questions. So basically, the mind and the brain are not the same thing, and anyone could be excused for thinking that they are, because that is generally in the majority of exposure that people will get through various different literature, media, etc., and social media and so on, is that the mind and the brain are the same thing. People use them interchangeably. And there's many philosophies of mind, and that is one of the philosophies is what they call identity theory, and that is where the mind and the brain are seen as the same thing, no distinction. But and there's various other theories of mind as well. Another one that's similar to that is that the brain produces the mind, and then there's another one that is similar where the brain is a processor of the mind, but the brain is still, so in all of those, the brain is seen as the main thing. Generally, the brain is generating thoughts. Now, that is incorrect, because scientifically, first of all, it doesn't fulfill the scientific research. So the research doesn't confirm that the mind and the brain are the same thing. It actually disproves it, which is very interesting. And so what the research does show, though, is that there is definitely something that controls the brain, that the brain isn't everything. Now, the most logical way to understand this is that your brain and your body, when you die, they die. They basically disintegrate, but you carry on. And so there's an eternal aspect that we all understand is part of our humanity. And that eternal aspect, that you-ness, that aliveness that goes on forever, that's mind. And so mind is the big collective word that I've chosen to use to represent spirit and soul, basically, and the eternal nature of mankind. And while we are alive in this body on this earth, we are, the brain and the body are basically hosting the mind, or they're a conduit of the mind, or the mind is using the brain and the body, because we need a physical brain and body in order for us to be able to have this conversation, to be able to function in this physical world. So interestingly enough, the research shows that our brain and body are only 1% of who we are as humans, and our mind is, which is the spirit and soul, is 99% of who we are. So if the 99% doesn't mean that the 1% is not important. If you don't look after your brain and body, the mind is going to battle to work through the brain and the body, and then that results in all kinds of mental and physical issues. We do have to look after the brain and the body, but not to the exclusion of the mind. We do live in an era where there is, and it's been going on for probably over 100 years now, but specifically in the last 50 years, where there's been huge emphasis on materialism, reductionism, which means it's brain, 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 brain. Feed your brain, do this for your brain. I mean, you just every day, every wellness, social media, you can't get away with this. It's your brain. Brain is the organ of the mind. It's definitely not the organ of the mind. The brain is, the whole brain and body are conduits or organs that the mind uses. So if you understand that the mind is 99%, there's different levels, and we can talk about that in a moment, because that's really interesting in terms of us being able to manage our mind. But essentially, we should be focusing on the 99%, which is the capturing thoughts, renewing the mind, that kind of thing, because that's where it's at. The mind tells the brain what to do.
Yes. That's amazing. When you're saying that, I have said that the greatest, because the conference is about what I call kingdom technology. And in a sense, there's a lot of things in the kingdom of God that we have yet to really discover and utilize. And if the mind is on an earthly program, meaning, let's say, if we have to renew our mind, that means our mind is on some other program and it needs to get back to an original program. To renew it means to put it back to where it was. In other words, not to renew it forward, but to set it in the original setting. And the original setting that God gave us, the spiritual mind, is what we're trying to get back to. But I've always said that, the human being that God created in his image and likeness is the highest form of technology ever to hit the earth. But when you're talking about, the advancement of technologies and the advancement of research and the advancement, and it seems like, as you were saying, we said we advanced, but we moved more towards materialism, more towards the physical, more towards the brain, instead of reversing back. And how do we get back to doing the research of the things that are not necessarily the tangible, but the intangible? I know that you caught some flack as I was reading through your information about kind of pushing the lines of certain boundaries in these areas. But how did you get on that path of going into maybe the intangible world? What pushed you into that?
Well, there's just, as a scientist, I'm a scientist and I've been a clinician and researcher. I still do research and publish in journal articles and all that kind of stuff. So as a scientist, you're looking for evidence, and there is more evidence of mind controlling brain and body, and of mind being this eternal nature, than there is of the mind not existing. And a lot of current science will argue that we don't have free will, and that that the mind doesn't really exist. It's just a epiphenomenon of the brain, etc. So from the beginning of my work as a scientist, I saw from the research that this is where the evidence was lying. And if you look at the way studies are done, where they say that the brain is everything, they actually take people and they give people scenarios and they ask them questions. So they first do mind stuff, and then they look at the impact on the brain. So the brain's not a generator, the brain is just a responder. So the brain will then do what the mind tells it to do. So then the work is in the mind. And it's also with our mind that we then eat healthy and do exercise and look after the brain and the body. It's not that the brain looks after itself or the body looks after itself. It's that the mind actually makes the decisions to feed the body and feed the brain and all that kind of stuff. So that research started years ago when I was in I've done a few degrees and back in South Africa in the 80s, and I've been in the field 40 years now. And I started working with people with traumatic brain injuries, and I had a professor who basically said that, there's no point in studying closed head injury, for example, because once the brain's damaged, that's it, that's kind of, and I challenged that and did some of the first neuroplasticity research in the world, and I've continued to do that research. And what that basically is with our mind, when we manage our mind, we change the brain and we change the body. So every moment of every day, our mind runs the show. And because our mind runs the show, our mind is changing because we're having different experiences, which means our brain and our body run the show. This is called, the field that I've specialized in is called psychoneurobiology. Psycho is the whole mind, spirit, soul aspect, and then neuro, brain, biology, body. And what we see from psychoneurobiology is that memories, for example, are not don't operate in isolation. Memories are stored in clusters. Those clusters of memories are thoughts, and thoughts are experiences. Those thoughts, which are made of memories, are stored not just in the brain, but they're stored throughout the entire body. So there's a version of that thought stored in the brain, very basic data version, and then there's different data versions stored in the body. But the main version of each cluster of memories is in the mind as an energy field. So we know a lot more now about electromagnetics, quantum energy, gravitational fields, and we know that surrounds us and operates through us. Pretty much how a cell phone works is pretty much how our brain works. And the electromagnetic field that a cell phone generates, we obviously as humans generate those fields too, but they're more complex, obviously. So the mind is actually this field around and through you. It's unique to you. It makes your heart beat. It makes your brain work. It's enabling you to make 800,000 to 1 million new cells every second. When you die, all of that stops. If you have a sonogram, if you have an EKG, if you do an EEG, any kind of technology that is placed on your body, what you're doing is you're measuring how the mind is moving and working through the brain and the body. So with that, in that knowledge, and the knowledge that I gained from all the research and working with patients, showing them that if you enable them to manage the different levels of mind, you are going to change how the person feels physically and mentally and how they function in life. So you can't eliminate what's happened to you, but you can restructure and change and edit those memories and change how they are, rewire them in the mind, in the psychoneurobiological network, and therefore change how they play out into life. Yeah. So maybe a good next point to go to would be to understand the levels of mind.
Yes.
And then at the conference, I'll be talking obviously in more depth and explaining all of this with, lots of images and things, which makes it a lot easier to understand.
Sure. I want to go back to another thing you said about how your day runs off of this idea in your mind. When I was studying some years ago, and when God was showing me this about the programs in our mind, I had this image of trees, and this is what really made me excited about talking to you, because so here's what happened. So as I was studying, God showed me in the Bible about all of the references to trees, and especially in Genesis 1, Adam and Eve eat from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, which is a dualistic program. And this dualistic program is not God's program. God has a singular consciousness. He doesn't have the dualistic programs that we deal with. And so when he showed me this, he said that this is programs are like every time you see trees, you're looking at cultural programs, you're looking at ideas believed, you're looking at systemic thought, you're looking at networks and all of this. And then one day, as I was looking at your video, you had this whole thing of trees on the screen, and I was like, no way. Can you see this thing here? Is it possible that we're getting up every day, living out a program, and basically it's living us? If it's there, it's taking us through the routine every day, isn't it? And if we don't change that, can you talk about the tree and the program and that all of that stuff there?
How that works? Okay, so that's a great question, and it's a great point that you've raised, Mike, Pastor Mike. I think the easiest way to understand that is two parts. If I can quickly explain the levels of the mind and how they connect to the eternal mind, the mind, the spirit of God, godness, whatever I always like to say godness, because I think then we don't try and reduce God down to our level. Okay, so let me explain the levels of mind and then explain how we can, how programs run in the brain versus how, okay, so let me explain the whole thing. Okay, so
Yes.
first of all, let's understand, and as I said, I'll explain this in depth in the conference with imagery as well, which really helps. But your mind has got 3 levels. So think of your mind as spirit and soul. So think first of all of the soul level. And the soul level in current zeitgeist, the languaging of the current zeitgeist, that is often referred to as consciousness. And there's a lot of talk around consciousness. It's really all over the news. It's very in, it's been in for years, but it's very much a conversational thing at the moment. What is consciousness? And not that it's only now, it's been for years. So consciousness, what is consciousness? This is something I've been studying for 40 years now. And consciousness is that kind of soul level. It's our thinking, feeling, and choosing. It's our ability, like we have right now, to focus. We're awake and we're focusing on each other and we're having this one conversation. If your team and my team suddenly started both speaking to us at the same time and there were multiple conversations, no one would know what was going on, because the conscious mind is structured to handle one conversation at a time, which is around about 2 to 3 words per second. And it's focused and it's got this ability to capture data, and that data is all the experiences of our everyday life coming in through the mind, coming in as an electromagnetic field into our mind area, and our mind processes that. So it first goes from outside into the mind area, into the mind zone, kind of like the sky around you. And that we would call, so then your conscious mind is aware of that. Then you get the non-conscious, N-O-N, conscious, N-O-N-C-O-N-S-C-I-O-U-S, non-conscious, not unconscious, non-conscious. Unconscious is a brain state. So it's when you sleep, when you're knocked unconscious, if you have altered states of consciousness from medications and that sort of thing. That's affecting the physiology of the brain. So unconsciousness has to do with the actual physiology and physicality of the brain. But when we talk about non-conscious, N-O-N, we're talking about the realm of the mind, the realm of the spirit and the soul. So the non-conscious is the equivalent of your spirit, if you want to sort of anchor that in language that people are familiar with. So think of your conscious mind as being your soul, and your non-conscious mind as being your spirit. Now, your spirit is connected to the spirit. Okay, so, and we are all connected and all one in God, etc., etc. So here you are as a spiritual being predominantly. You have a conscious mind, and you also have an interim level, which is the subconscious. And the subconscious needs to be there. It's a filtering system. It's like a waiting room, because the non-conscious mind is so fast. It's beyond space and time. It's not limited by time. It's not limited. It's not limited by 2 to 3 words in a moment. It can deal with an infinite number of bits of information in any one moment. The estimated speed, and this is honestly estimates that we can only make based on the knowledge and technology that we have, is that the non-conscious mind probably operates at somewhere between 400 billion actions per second, if not faster. Wow. So that is really fast. And that should be, because your non-conscious is your wisdom, it's your insight, it's your intuition, it is your creativity, it is your ability to reason, to understand meaning, to have intentionality, all that amazing stuff, all the solutions, all the connection to the wisdom to know where to find truth, etc. All of that is there, including the stuff that you've put there from your experiences of life. So we go through life happens, it goes into our mind, and it goes into the conscious mind and non-conscious mind pretty much simultaneously. But the conscious mind is much slower, so it's only aware of something after the fact. So the non-conscious mind pretty much absorbs 100% of what's going on around you in any one moment. It then does this filtering thing where it eliminates a large majority. Otherwise, we wouldn't cope as humans. We would just explode. And it then finds the areas that we have, to use your wording, programmed, and I would call it wired. We've wired in certain ways of thinking that we didn't manage. So we've got certain toxic patterns in the non-conscious, and our non-conscious mind finds those. It says this sort of sweeping action finds those and puts those into the subconscious. So it slows it down, this very fast non-conscious can't fit into the conscious mind. The conscious mind would explode. Our brain and body would explode with that power. So it has to be slowed down. And so the non-conscious takes in the environment, neutralizes most of it, finds the most toxic area that is disrupting your life in this current moment, and slows it down and puts it into the subconscious. And then the subconscious catches your attention through signals. So it catches your conscious mind's attention through sending up signals. And those signals are how you feel, where you feel that in your body, what you're saying and doing, your behaviors, and your perspectives, your attitudes in life. So let's say you're feeling depressed, you've got a gut ache, you're feeling this depression in your gut or something, you are withdrawing from people, and your attitude is life sucks. So that's just very simple. But those four signals always work together. They signals, they data, they information. And what we're meant to do is, they signals coming from our spiritual part of us via the subconscious. They're attached to a cluster of memories that forms a thought. And those which look like trees, that's why I use the analogy of the trees, because they look like trees in the brain and hedges in the body, but they look like clouds in the mind. So they've got three different forms, these thoughts. Trees in the brain, hedges, garden hedges in the body, and clouds in the mind. And they're all connected.
Is this from, when you say those images, is that from is that your symbols, or is that something in medical scans, or is that what the pictures are showing?
I've used these analogies because it's the close view, but if you look at, and I'm going to show this in the conference, but if you look at scans of neurons, they look like trees. Okay. And when you zoom in on cells right down to the cellular, right down inside a cell, and you go down to microtubules, they look like little hedges. So we see from biologically, so we use analogies to explain complex biological terms, but essentially, and then if you look at electromagnetic fields, they form clouds. So that's where we get, so this conversation is first a cloud of all the words I'm saying are memories. So I'm speaking, I'm sending out an electromagnetic force. You and all the viewers and listeners are gathering this data into their mind as a little energy field. So each word is adding another drop to that rain cloud. If you think of a rain cloud made of drops of water, that's lots of little energy. Then as it's all gathered, it's gathered into the mind, but it's the non-conscious that gathers it first, kind of sorts it out, puts it in the subconscious, and then catches the conscious mind's attention. So when you're aware of me speaking, you don't know, none of you notice the interruption, but there's already been a whole lot of stuff going on a non-conscious level before you're consciously aware of my words. So your non-conscious level is always about anything from 5 to 10 seconds ahead of the conscious mind in terms of experience. Okay, so there's a lot going on, and then we become aware. Not going on, we become aware. And so this is happening all the time. And then once it hits the conscious level, the conscious mind then gathers that data and then puts it into the brain, makes a copy of it. So it makes a copy of that cloud. So think of a photocopy or something. And this is all done via sort of electromagnetics, and then it gets put into the brain, and then the brain responds on an electrical, and I'm holding up a brain here, so it's in the mind, and then the mind, we put it into the brain, and then the brain has an electromagnetic and neurochemical and quantum response and genetic response, and that makes proteins. So the cloud then becomes, via that process, becomes these trees. The wiry looking tree would be a toxic experience, building a toxic thought, and it would be, let's say, a stormy rain cloud, a toxic looking tree and broken hedges. If it's a healthy thought, beautiful fluffy clouds, beautiful green tree, beautiful little hedges. That's kind of and they're all connected. So that's your psychoneurobiology. So when every experience every day is being wired in this way, in through the mind, the unconscious first, subconscious, conscious, and then the conscious does all this little copying and pasting, and the little networks are formed. Now, here's the thing. If we don't manage that process, we will build, because the brain is a data capturing device. Okay, it's a data. So what it does is it captures memories as data, memories as data, emotions as data. But there's no context, there's no logic, there's no reasoning. It also manages all our senses. So if you stimulate a part of certain parts of the brain, you can activate a memory, or you can activate an emotion, or you can activate a sense. But you don't activate abstract reasoning or logic or creativity creativity, because it's not coming from the brain. The brain just merely stored the data, but it's your mind that makes sense of the data, if that makes sense. So that's important to know. That's why we can be triggered, and if we live in our physical, mainly we don't renew our mind and capture our thoughts, because mind management that I teach is basically capturing a thought to renew your mind. If you don't do that, you're then going to be triggered by the data and you're going to respond to the sensation. So you're going to then just have a brain response controlled by the conscious mind. But now let's talk about the conscious mind again, the soul area. Okay. It's got two parts. I'm going to put my hands together. On the one part, there's the toddler part, and the other side, there is the parent part. So think of a toddler. A toddler is hungry for knowledge. They're learning. They're interested in everything. They're happy 1 minute and crying 1 minute. They're exploring, and that's what we are like as humans. We're constantly gathering data to learn, and we're up and down. So if your toddler doesn't have a parent, there's going to be a lot of pain and a lot of problems and a lot of injuries. Same with us. If we don't have a parent guiding, so the conscious mind has a toddler part that we need to gather data and think and feel and choose. But to make good choices, you need the parent guiding. So the conscious mind, the soul area, has a toddler part and a parent part. What happens, to refer right back to your initial your question about we program, these programs that run us. That means that we have focused just on the toddler mind. We haven't listened to the parent mind. And the role of the parent is to guide, but the parent gets advice. So the minute that the balance in the conscious mind occurs between the toddler and the parent, that opens the doorway to listening to the signals from the subconscious, which means you're listening to your deepest spiritual level, and your spiritual level is getting its wisdom from the spirit. So we've got to keep the doorway open between the parent mind, the subconscious, and the non-conscious spiritual level, so we can connect with the spirit, which is God. Okay. So if we cut that avenue off and we just live in the toddler mind, then we're putting data into the brain in a toxic way. And if we don't manage that, whatever you think about the most, toddler mind, thinking about that social media scrolling, doom scrolling or whatever, and you just keep thinking in a negative way, that's growing. Whatever you think about the most grows. And then that becomes a toddler mind brain activation program or wiring that then tends to run us. And that's what causes the depression and the anxiety and that kind of thing. What we need to do, because it's very disruptive, and it also leads to increase in physical and mental health. So what we need to do is learn how to manage that. We've got to train ourselves to listen, get the toddler mind to listen to the parent mind, to listen to the wisdom. And that's where I'll explain that in the conference. The research I've done, there's a whole formula for capturing thoughts and renewing the mind.
Yes. So when I was much younger, I went through a very bad experience. One day I woke up and I had this incredible, I didn't even know what to call it, but I had anxiety. It just hit me one day, and it literally nearly drove me to the grave. It literally, I was a minister already. I had all these, spiritual insights. I had all this stuff, but I never experienced this, and it almost locked me into like a zombie mode. And I remember for about 2 years or so, I was trying to pray and ask God to heal me, Lord, heal me. And I had seen healings, physical healings all the time. And then one day, it took this long for me to reach this point. One day, as I was laying in my office, crying out to God, I finally heard him say, and this is how I talk to a lot of people about their anxiety now. And I know your new book, Help in a Hurry, has a lot to do with dealing with that type of stuff, anxiety and all that. So maybe we can segue with this. He said, son, I'm not going to deliver you from what I gave you dominion over. And that one piece of information, you're talking about managing it, dealing with it. That one piece of information put me on a completely different, I did go through it biblically and I did learn through it biblically, but that, you're talking about mind management and all of that, I literally rewired the mind and stopped. I mean, within a matter of a week and a half, I stopped and I was suicidal. I mean, my daughter went through it some years later and she got to where she wouldn't eat anything, wouldn't touch anything. She had agoraphobia and she had every type of phobia. But since I knew how to deal with it, all I did was grab her and take her instead of I believe in deliverance and all of that, but instead of that, I put her on a daily program where I made her mind change, and it kind of fleshed it out. But talk just a little bit about, sometimes we like the dominion. It sounds like you're saying we have dominion, or we have the controls of something that may be taking people for a ride, and we don't know how to grab it. Maybe we're trying to pray it away instead of manage it.
Exactly. It's mind management. You've got to get in that garden of Gethsemane and face it and go through it. So the issue is that mind management is not discussed enough. Mind management is the word that I use for helping us to get the toddler mind to listen to the parent mind, and then then the parent mind then opens access to the non-conscious wisdom. So there's literally you can learn to do. This is something that it's natural. It's natural to humanity. It's part of our human nature. But and we're so powerful. We have the superpower, but we can be so, whatever you are listening to and merging with, that's what you're going to be controlled by. So if you are constantly told, if you have a feeling of depression, you've got a mental illness, there's something wrong with your brain. If there's something wrong with your brain, there's no hope. If that message comes through, and the church is one of the worst places where this happens, because it's, there's something wrong with you, you're sinning, it's your sin that is so hopeless. It creates such hope. There's no love in that. There's no, depression is not an illness. You aren't depression. Depression is a warning signal, one of the 4 warning signals: emotions, behaviors, perceptions, and sensations. And it's a data, and there's a because of. You want depression, you depressed because of. So if you think, I'm depressed because I'm a sinner, or I'm depressed because I did something bad, or I'm bad, or I'm broken, or my brain's broken, you'll stay stuck in the toddler mind, and you're just going to get worse and worse and worse, and you're going to live in the sensations of your body and go into total despair, which is what we see happening. And then medicated, and that doesn't fix it, and all these things. But it's hard, but when we face these, we've got to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, and it's okay not to be okay. Very important to understand that. But within 63 seconds, you can start experiencing that peace which is that umpire. And there's techniques that you can do that I used to do with my patients that are scientific. Science is spiritual. Science is knowledge. Science comes from the word sclera, which means knowledge. So in this particular book that you mentioned, Help in a Hurry, that's coming out on the 5th of August, and I'll talk about this as well at the conference, Help in a Hurry. What I found from my research is that if you can help someone who's in a bad place, like let's say that your daughter or yourself in that situation, I've worked with many people that have been in that situation. If you can get success in 63 seconds, so if you can feel better in 63 seconds, that means that's a manageable amount of time. That means maybe the next minute I can be okay. Maybe for 10 minutes I can be okay. Once you get through that first 63 seconds, time opens up. Then what we find is what the research shows, that if you can then start identifying whether this is a pattern of thought, and that's dominating, that's disruptive. In other words, your non-conscious knows, but you've got to actually train yourself to open up your mind, as I keep saying, to the non-conscious. And that takes about 7 days to open up and find the patterns. And then once you find the patterns, the rewiring of that psycho-neurobiological network from those clouds of energy, the conscious mind, the parent toddler conscious mind, through to the networks in the brain and the body, that whole network, from the non-conscious to the subconscious to the conscious to the brain to the body, that whole network, you're not going to rewire that in a day or 4 days or 2 days, or it takes at least, not 21 either, it takes at least 63 days to rewire a program, a habit, a pattern, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of my research has looked at how long it takes. So there's a 63-second mark, there's that 7-day mark, and there's the 63-day mark, and they're sequential. And that's how we can learn to capture that thought in the 63 seconds, find the pattern that needs to be renewed over the 7 days, and then do the renewal over the 63. And then you start with the next one, because it's an ongoing thing. We have so many things from our past and our present and our future that are catching us. So mind management is an ongoing thing. And as the scriptures say, and not only the Bible, other holy scriptures also talk about the fact that we need to bring all thoughts into captivity. What scientists are finding all the time is it's not just now and then. You need to constantly monitor. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what I teach people is, how can I self-regulate? How can I manage my mind? How can I honor what I'm going through and rewire with self-compassion and kindness kindness and love, and keep on doing this growth, getting into this learning and growth process.
Well, Dr. Leaf, that was a really, really insightful, loaded podcast. I cannot wait for the full version at the conference. You're going to have plenty of time there. So guys, if you are not registered, and I know the conference is filling up so fast, if you are not registered yet, make sure that you, one, go check out all of Dr. Leaf's resources. She is all over YouTube and the internet. But make sure you have made your plans to have everybody here go and register now, and the link will be listed on this podcast. And we will see all of you guys in September at the Reprogram Conference. All right. God bless you guys, and we will see you on the next podcast.